So you have to put up with me one more Sunday after today. Next Sunday will be a very important day as we start our Ribbons for Reason ministry, putting ribbons on our courtyard fence in memory of each person who has been killed in Savannah by gunfire and will be killed by gunfire in 2015. And to encourage us to work for common sense gun laws in our country. So I hope you will be with us next Sunday. It's going to be an important day for us. Every 3 years or so, I like to preach on the text that gives us the story of Jonah and the whale. And when I preach on this text, I can't help but sing part of that wonderful song from George Gershwin's opera, Porgy and Bess. It ain't necessarily so. It ain't necessarily so. The things that you're liable to read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so. Oh, Jonah, he lived in a whale. Oh, Jonah, he lived in a whale, for he made his home in that fish's abdomen. Oh, Jonah, he lived in a whale. Sing it, choir, with me. It ain't necessarily so. It ain't necessarily so. The things that you're liable to read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so. Methuselah lived 900 years. Methuselah lived 900 years. But who calls that living when no gal will give in to no man what's 900 years? Everybody, it ain't necessarily so. It ain't necessarily so. The things that you're liable to read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so. My grandmother, Hester, lived on the May River in Bluffton, South Carolina, so I would spend my summers as a child in Bluffton swimming, fishing, crabbing. It was quite the life. The dock next to my grandmother's dock was owned by a man named Chess Hale. And Chess was kind of, Mr. Hale, I should say, was kind of a legend in Bluffton. A rather tall, older man with a gravelly voice and white hair. He had a big, broad-barreled chest with lots of hair on it. He always wore short pants and never, ever wore a shirt. His skin had a dark, dark tan, which seemed darker because of his snowy white hair. Mr. Hale was always around water. If he wasn't in the water, he was on his dock or in a boat. My relatives told me, and told all the other youngsters, that Mr. Hale had taught Johnny Weissmuller how to swim. For those of you who are too young to know who Johnny Weissmuller was, you would know him by his other name, Tarzan. Johnny Weissmuller starred in 12 Tarzan movies, and although other actors played the king of the jungle, Weissmuller was by far the actor most known for the role. He's the first to do the famous Tarzan yell, which I'm not going to do for you because, unfortunately, I can't. I've tried. When Johnny Weissmuller was a young man in the 1920s, he was the world's fastest swimmer. He won 5 gold medals in the Olympics. He won 52 national championships, and he set 67 world records. He was fast. And Mr. Hale taught him how to swim. Oh, Tarzan was taught by Chess Hale. Oh, Tarzan was taught by Chess Hale. He learned how to swim fast like a great big old striped bass. Oh, Tarzan was taught by Chess Hale. Now, when I got older, I realized that there was a possibility that Mr. Hale really didn't teach Johnny Weissmuller how to swim. In fact, there's probably a 99.9% chance he didn't teach Weissmuller how to swim. But that story told us a lot of things that were very, very true. By telling us that Mr. Hale taught Tarzan how to swim, the adults were letting us know that Mr. Hale is a master of the sea. That no one knew or understood the water and its nature the way old Mr. Hale did. They were telling us that this man who walked around shirtless every day with his big hairy chest and spent half his time in the water was the real Tarzan. That if you want to learn something about the sea, then you better keep your eyes and your ears open whenever you're around Chess Hale. And so even though the story I was told about Mr. Hale probably wasn't factual, it conveyed truth. Lots of important truth. You see, biblical literalists have searched the 7 seas trying to find evidence of someone who has been in the belly of a fish and lived to tell about it. But we could use our time better by asking ourselves, what is God trying to tell us through this story? How does it affect my life and those around me? What is it calling me to do? Instead of arguing about whether or not something in the Bible really happened, we should be focusing on the truth the stories reveal. The answers given, and many times the questions that are raised. Sometimes the questions are more important than the answers. So God comes to this man, Jonah, and says, "Go to Nineveh and preach to the people. Tell them to repent of their sins." Jonah didn't think this was a very good idea. He didn't like the Ninevites and doesn't want anything to do with them. So there was no pious, "Here I am, Lord, send me," like we sing at the end of every service here. Jonah refuses. He hops on a boat and goes the other way. Eventually, he is thrown overboard, and then, as you know, he's swallowed by a big fish. After 3 days and 3 nights of severe indigestion, the fish coughs up Jonah. And then God comes to Jonah again and says, "Again, go to the people of Nineveh and proclaim my message." Though he's still reluctant to go, this time Jonah listens to God and heads to Nineveh. When he gets there, he preaches an 8-word sermon. 40 days more, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. That's it. Miraculously, the world's shortest sermon is a big success. Everyone in the city repents. Every single one of them, the oldest person to the youngest person, puts on their sackcloth and repents. The king puts on his sackcloth and repents. Even the cows and the sheep put on their sackcloths and repent. Everything and everyone. How does Jonah feel about this great success? Horrible, awful, angry, depressed. He says, how dare God change God's mind? God was supposed to destroy and kill those evil Ninevites. How dare God forgive the unforgivable? I knew this would happen. That's why I refused to go in the first place. I knew God was so merciful and so forgiving that He wouldn't give the Ninevites what they deserve. And I didn't want to be part of that. I'm disgusted that they are not suffering. Now, why would this exaggerated, somewhat comical story be told to the people of Israel? Nineveh was the capital of Assyria. And the Assyrians were longtime enemies of Israel. For many times in battle, the Assyrians had crushed and humiliated the Israelites. Then they stripped them of their culture and their land. If that wasn't bad enough, the Assyrians also worshiped idols, worshiped other gods. Surely God would press the delete button and get rid of these evil people. It is with this history and in this setting that the Jews are told the story of Jonah, this remarkable story of compassion, mercy, forgiveness, and it raises interesting questions for the Jews. Could it be that the Hebrew God is also the God of the Ninevites, of the Assyrians? Could it be that God cares for them too? And if that's the case, what does that mean for the people of Israel and how we treat the Assyrians? Even more importantly than asking what the story meant for the Jews at that time is asking, what does it mean for you and me today? What answers does it give and what questions does it raise? What does it mean as Americans and for our attitudes toward people of other lands, especially those we call enemy? What does it mean as Christians and for our attitudes toward people we struggle with in our country? What does it mean as people who are part of a community of faith and for our attitudes towards those we struggle within our families and within our church family? For you see, Jonah is my cousin. We are kin. We share the same blood and many of the same faults and struggles. I experience a touch of joy when my enemies falter. I experience sadness when those I find annoying find pleasure. Jonah is the patron saint of anyone who secretly smiles when the high school prom queen shows up at the 25th reunion with 60 extra pounds and her third husband. That's a good one, isn't it? Jonah is the soulmate of the employee who feels delicious pleasure when the boss is suddenly sacked with 15 minutes to clear his office. Jonah is the poster child of anyone who enjoys reading in the paper that the family values politician has been photographed in a hot tub with a woman who is not his wife. I am Jonah. And our tendency, is to want people to get what we feel they deserve. But that's not how God works, and that's not what Jesus taught. He especially made this point in the story of the prodigal son, and remember, the older brother was much like Jonah, not happy about the father's forgiveness and acceptance of the younger son who had messed up. I'm not sure why we struggle with forgiving others. Perhaps much of it has to do with our survival instincts. We've been hurt and we don't want to be hurt again. Or perhaps we simply want revenge. But as we've talked about many times before, we are not doing ourselves a favor when we hold a grudge and carry resentment. The bitter heart eats its owner, the Bantu proverb says. The bitter heart eats its owner. So the way of survival is not to hold on to grudges or to carry resentment. The way of survival is by letting go and forgiving. Now, forgiving does not mean forgetting. Very different. We were told as children to forgive and forget, but no, we must not forget. Forgiving does not mean putting oneself back into an abusive or destructive situation again. Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel says that the worst sin of all is to forget. So don't forget, but by all means forgive. We have to. We've all heard the expression that holding a grudge and not forgiving is like drinking poison and hoping the other person will die. The individual benefits of forgiveness are well known. You're less likely to suffer depression, chronic pain, high blood pressure, and other health problems that accompany deep-seated hurt. And you are more likely to regain control of your life rather than remaining hostage to the person who hurt you. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, chairman of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, says that forgiveness helped his country come to terms with apartheid and tame further violence. Forgiveness, Tutu says, is the best form of self-interest. As you know, we had one of the most remarkable weeks in the history of our country. A remarkable week of change. A week many of us will never forget. And if this past week doesn't encourage you to go to church and give thanks to God, nothing will. After the unimaginable massacre of 9 people in a church in Charleston, leaders who have never spoken out against the Confederate flag and its removal suddenly began to do so. And by the way, the flag that has become known as the Confederate flag never was the flag of the Confederacy. There were 3 different official Confederate flags during the Civil War, and none of them looked like the present flag we call the Confederate flag. This flag became popular in the late 1940s and in the early 1960s as a protest against civil rights and desegregation. This was a way for white Southerners to thumb their noses at the federal government and their laws. Of course, another remarkable change was on Friday when the Supreme Court ruled in making same-sex marriage a right for people nationwide. Wow. On one hand, it's long overdue. On the other hand, it happened faster than we could imagine. And though this is a wonderful happening for all of us, I want to offer a special congratulations to our gay and lesbian members. Congratulations. But there was something else that happened earlier in the week. Something remarkable that set the tone for this week of love and justice and change. And perhaps it was even more remarkable than all the other wonderful things that happened. And you probably heard about it. The families of the victims in Charleston faced the killer, faced the one who savagely took away their loved ones and said, "I forgive you. We are in great pain. You have hurt us deeply. Our lives will never be the same because of you and what you've done. Without our loved ones, we hurt. But God forgives you, and we forgive you too." You see, the things that happened this week are almost as unbelievable as a man living inside a fish for 3 days and 3 nights, and cows and sheep putting on sackcloths and repenting that, as you know, these things really happened. But this past week also is a metaphor that teaches us something very important. We create an environment for remarkable things to happen when we're able to forgive. When we forgive someone, we're planting seeds for incredible things to happen in our lives and all around us. At the end of the story of Jonah, God confronts the sulking Jonah with a question. Should I not be concerned about Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who don't know their right hand from their left? Shouldn't I be concerned about them? Shouldn't I care? We never hear Jonah's response. There is no tidy ending to the story. What will happen? The ball is in Jonah's court. Will he continue sulking and be bitter? Or will he come around to seeing things God's way? And the ball is in our court too. Whenever we get hurt, or whenever we feel wronged, which direction will we go? The way of bitterness and resentment, or the way of grace and love? The way to life is love. The way to life is love. If you want contentment, let go of resentment. The way to life is love. Amen and amen.